This is a carton of milk. The farmer who produced what's inside earned about $1 for it. And I'm going to show you where the rest of that money actually goes, because almost none of it works the way you'd assume. The company making the most money in this category right now isn't even a dairy company. Coca-Cola built it through a brand called Fairlife, ultra-filtered milk that barely existed on shelves a decade ago, and turned it into one of the fastest growing brands in the company's history. What Coca-Cola figured out, and the rest of the dairy industry apparently missed for years, is that the white liquid itself was never really the profitable part. Fairlife now sells for the equivalent of roughly $10 to $13 a gallon, more than double, sometimes nearly triple, what a regular gallon of whole milk costs at the store. Meanwhile, the farmer supplying the raw milk behind all of it still gets paid on the same basic government formula every other dairy farmer in the country works under, somewhere close to $1 to $2 a gallon at the farm gate. That gap between what the farmer earns and what the finished product eventually sells for is basically the whole story of this industry. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how that gap gets built, who's building it, and why the answer starts, strangely enough, with a soda company. Understanding why that gap exists means understanding how a dairy farmer actually gets paid in the first place, because this isn't a free market the way you'd expect it to be. Raw milk prices in the United States run through a system called Federal Milk Marketing Orders, 11 separate regional orders that price milk according to how it eventually gets used. Fresh drinking milk, yogurt, and ice cream, cheese or butter and powder, combined with the actual butter fat and protein content sitting inside that milk. $21.33 per hundredweight, roughly 100 pounds or about 11.5 gallons. That's the base Class 1 price for fluid milk as of July 2026. Farmers aren't setting their own prices here. A government formula is setting it for them, and that formula has been quietly squeezing farmers for decades. Dairy farmers kept 52 cents of every retail dairy dollar back in 1980. By 1999, that had dropped to 32 cents. And the most recent USDA figures from 2024 put it at roughly 25 cents. For a gallon of whole milk specifically, the farm value sat at $1.97 against a $3.98 retail price that same year, which sounds close to half until you look at an actual real-world example. In Wisconsin, in August 2025, the milk inside 1 gallon that retailed for $4.89 was worth about $1.07 at the farm gate. Peter Vitaliano, an economist with the National Milk Producers Federation, didn't mince words about it in 2025, admitting the gap between farm and retail has never been this wide. My take on that is fairly simple, honestly. Milk in the modern dairy business stopped being the product a long time ago and became the raw material instead. Protein content, shelf life, convenience, a health halo wrapped around the label, that's what's actually being sold to you now, while the white liquid itself functions closer to a commodity input than a finished good. That gap gets stretched even wider once the milk hits the grocery store. Milk is a textbook loss leader, a product retailers deliberately price at or near cost, sometimes below it, specifically to pull you through the front door. It usually sits at the very back of the store too, forcing you to walk past everything else just to reach it. Dean Foods, once the largest fluid milk company in America, actually cited this exact kind of retail pricing pressure as a headwind in its own bankruptcy filing. The clearest public example of this math, though, comes from a completely different product, Costco's rotisserie chicken. Former Chief Financial Officer Richard Galanti admitted on a 2015 earnings call that keeping that chicken priced at $4.99, instead of bumping it to $5.99 like everyone else in the industry, cost the company an estimated $30 to $40 million a year in gross margin on purpose every single year. Grocery stores run milk on that exact same logic. Here's my honest read on that. The store selling you milk that cheap isn't doing you any favors. You're not the customer being rewarded here, you're the target being led deeper into the store, and when that price gets squeezed hard at the register, it's the farmer, several steps back up the chain, who ends up eating most of that discount. Nowhere does that damage show up more clearly than in what happened to Dean Foods. a company that built its entire empire on exactly the product we've been discussing, fluid white milk. $12.4 billion, that's what Dean Foods did in sales back in 2008. 10 years later, in 2018, that number had collapsed to $7.7 billion, a 37% drop in a single decade. Chapter 11 followed on November 12, 2019, with the company carrying roughly $1.022 billion in net debt at the time. Bankruptcy attorney Kenneth Rosen summed up what happened afterward without any hesitation. "I don't think there's any question that Dean Foods is a casualty of the changes in consumer taste away from milk. Dairy Farmers of America, the largest dairy cooperative in the country, swooped in and bought the majority of Dean's assets for $433 million, a deal that finalized in May 2020. Dean Foods might be one of the clearest cautionary tales in the entire food industry, in my opinion. You can be the single biggest player in your category and still collapse if the category itself is quietly disappearing underneath you while nobody's watching. Fluid milk consumption in the US had actually been sliding for decades before that bankruptcy even hit. And USDA data shows the amount of fluid milk available per person dropped 42% between 1979 and 2019 alone, a decline that was speeding up, not slowing down, in the years right before Dean Foods finally went under. Which brings us back around to Fairlife, and the answer to why a soda company ended up building the biggest new milk brand in America. Select milk producers and dairy farmer Mike McCloskey founded Fairlife back in 2012, partnering with Coca-Cola from the very start. Its core technology, ultrafiltration, actually traces back to Cornell University. The process breaks milk down into its basic components, water, protein, fat, and lactose, then recombines them to hit a specific target, more protein, less sugar, lactose stripped out entirely, and a shelf life far longer than regular milk. Coca-Cola bought out the remaining 57.5% of Fairlife. It didn't already own in January 2020, paying about $980 million in cash. That wasn't the final number though, not even close. Fairlife's explosive growth triggered additional performance-based milestone payments baked into the original deal, and by early 2025, according to CNN's review of Coca-Cola's own earnings disclosures, those milestone payments alone were estimated at more than $6 billion on top of the initial $980 million, combining for more than $7 billion total, making it one of the most expensive acquisitions in the company's entire history. And the growth behind that eye-watering price tag is genuinely real. Fairlife's retail value sat around $10 million back in 2014. Coca-Cola CEO James Quincey laid out the trajectory for investors in early 2025 in stark terms. In 2014, the retail value of Fairlife was $10 million. Last year, it was nearly $4 billion. And of course, it's a compounding business. In the most recent 52 weeks of available data, ending in December 2025, Fairlife's refrigerated white milk sales alone grew 28% year over year to $782 million, compared to a measly 2% growth for the entire milk category surrounding it. Ultra-filtered milk overall still represents a fairly small slice of total milk sales, about 7% of the category, but that slice is expanding nearly 15% a year, and Fairlife alone accounts for 96% of it. What I take from all of that is that Coca-Cola buying a milk company might be one of the most underrated strategic moves in modern consumer goods. They didn't really buy a dairy business at all. They bought a protein delivery brand, then plugged it directly into the best beverage distribution network on the planet. On the shelf, a 52 fluid ounce bottle of Fairlife whole milk runs somewhere between $4.29 on average nationally and $5.32 at Walmart, depending on the retailer you are standing in. Convert that up to a full gallon and it works out to roughly $10.56 to $13.10 per gallon equivalent. Industry publication, DairyReporter pegs that at a 190% premium per ounce over regular whole milk at Walmart specifically, nearly triple the price for essentially the same starting ingredient. To be fair, not all of that becomes pure profit sitting in Coca-Cola's pocket. The company has never broken out Fairlife's specific margin publicly, so that particular number stays unknown. What is known is that Coca-Cola as a whole reports gross margins somewhere in the 60 to roughly 62% range company-wide. Some of that premium does flow back down to the farms. Actually supplying Fairlife too, farmers in that specific supply chain can earn reported bonuses of around $2.50 per hundredweight for hitting quality benchmarks like low somatic cell counts and higher protein content stacked on top of the standard government set price everyone else in the industry receives. Coca-Cola is not slowing down here either, committing more than $1.3 billion combined toward expanding Fairlife's production capacity, including a $650 million plant in Webster, New York, built to process 5 million pounds of milk a day, plus an expansion of an existing facility in Coopersville, Michigan. Fairlife's story has not stayed entirely clean along the way, though. The Animal Recovery Mission released undercover footage from Fair Oaks Farms on June 4, 2019. One of the farms supplying Fairlife's milk and co-founded by Fairlife's own founder, and that footage showed clear mistreatment of calves. It landed especially hard against a brand that had spent years marketing itself on humane, transparent farming practices. Fairlife and Coca-Cola eventually settled a resulting class action lawsuit over those marketing claims for $21 million, with final court approval coming in September 2022. If you're finding this useful, now's a good moment to hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps a channel like this reach more people, and there's plenty more of these breakdowns coming. Let's keep going because Fairlife and Dean Foods are really just 2 data points inside a much bigger system. Underneath everything covered so far sits a support system most people have never even heard of. Beyond the federal milk marketing orders setting the base price, the US government runs a program called Dairy Margin Coverage, which pays farmers whenever the gap between the national milk price and the average cost of feed drops below a level they've chosen to insure against. That program got extended out to 2031 and 2025, tucked into legislation nicknamed the One Big Beautiful Bill. Programs like dairy revenue protection and livestock gross margin insurance are federally subsidized too, covering somewhere between 44% and 55% of the premium cost depending on which coverage tier a farmer picks. During the pandemic, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program sent roughly $3 billion directly to dairy farms across 2020 and 2021 alone. Added all together, and USDA has estimated in figures cited by the Cato Institute that American dairy farmers receive as much as $8 billion a year through these kinds of price-supporting mechanisms combined. Cato frames the total cost of federal dairy policy as roughly a 26% implicit tax landing on consumers. This isn't unique to the US either. In the European Union, dairy farmers receive roughly 1,800 euros per cow every single year under the Common Agricultural Policy. New Zealand went the opposite direction entirely, running with 0 direct dairy subsidies since it deregulated its agricultural sector back in the 1980s. On top of the price supports, there is also a mandatory marketing fund most people have genuinely never heard of. Dairy producers have paid 15 cents per hundredweight to something called the Dairy Promotion Program since 1983, while processors separately contribute 20 cents per hundredweight to MilkPEP. That fund is exactly what powered campaigns like Got Milk, which launched back in 1993, and later Milk Life, which replaced it in 2014. A 1999 study found those checkoff-funded ad campaigns produced roughly a 6% bump in sales, though that bump did nothing to stop the long-term decline in how much milk people were actually drinking overall. Some of that checkoff money ended up in fairly unexpected places too. Filings reviewed by the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and the Pulitzer Center found dairy management paid the NFL more than $25 million between 2013 and 2017 alone. My honest take on all of that is this: the strangest part of the entire milk industry is that the government helped make milk artificially cheap for decades, then had to start paying farmers just to survive that cheapness it created, and on top of it all, taxed those same struggling farmers to fund advertising for a product that kept losing customers regardless. All of this played out while a completely different category was supposed to be eating dairy's lunch entirely: plant-based milk. Oat, almond, soy, and the rest of the alternative milk aisle carries a price tag anywhere from 20% to 50% above regular dairy milk, and the global category was valued somewhere between $20.9 billion and $22.5 billion in 2024, depending on which market research firm you are trusting. There's also been a long-running legal fight over who even gets to use the word milk in the first place. with dairy groups pushing legislation like the Dairy Pride Act, while the FDA eventually settled on guidance in 2023 that lets companies keep calling almond and soy drinks milk, as long as they clearly show how the nutrition actually compares. But the sales story has not unfolded the way most people assumed it would. Plant-based milk sales in the US actually fell 5% in 2024, dropping to $2.8 billion according to SPIN's data analyzed by the Good Food Institute, while regular dairy milk sales grew 1% over that exact same period. The Good Food Institute's most recent report shows plant-based milk sitting at $2.7 billion, and just 13% of total retail milk sales in 2025, marking its second straight year of decline. Even Oatly, the company most closely associated with the entire oat milk boom, is still working toward consistent profitability. Its fourth quarter 2025 revenue landed at $233.8 million with a 34.5% gross margin, an improvement over $214.3 million and 28.8% a year earlier, with the company now projecting 2025 as its first fully profitable year as a public company. Zoom out to the entire global dairy industry, and that same pattern of consolidation shows up everywhere you look. The French company Lactalis became the first dairy company in history to cross $30 billion in annual dairy revenue, according to Rabobank's 2024 rankings, hitting $31.9 billion and landing ahead of Nestlé at $23.9 billion, and Dairy Farmers of America at $23 billion. Danone, the Chinese company Yili, Denmark's Arla, New Zealand's Fonterra at $14.7 billion, and Canada's Saputo round out the rest of the pack, with Saputo posting the strongest growth of the group at 8.4%. And yet combined, the top 20 dairy companies in the world only grew total revenue by 0.6% in 2024, a clear sign of just how mature and slow-growing the core business has become, even while individual players like Fairlife post explosive growth inside it. That sluggish growth is already triggering another wave of consolidation. Fonterra is reportedly divesting its consumer business to Lactalis in a deal worth roughly $2.3 billion, while in Europe, Arla is merging with Germany's DMK to form what would become the continent's largest dairy cooperative, worth close to 19 billion euros. There's even a trade angle woven through all of this. Tariffs on Canadian dairy got repeatedly cited by the US throughout 2025 as a point of tension, with rates reportedly running over 200%. But according to agricultural economist Al Masul, those tariffs only kick in once imports cross specific quota thresholds. The US hasn't actually hit yet, meaning, in his own words, in practice, these tariffs are not actually paid by anyone. Meanwhile, actual US dairy exports to Canada have climbed roughly 55% since 2020. So back to where this all started, this is a carton of milk. The farmer behind it earns somewhere close to $1 for his work. The government set that price using an 11-region formula built around butterfat content and end use. The grocery store selling it to you is quite possibly losing money on it on purpose, just to get you through the door and further into the aisles. And the company that figured out how to turn that same white liquid into a nearly $4 billion brand wasn't a dairy company at all, it was Coca-Cola, using a filtration process invented at Cornell to strip milk down to its raw components and rebuild it into something people would happily pay 2 to 3 times more for. Dean Foods bet everything on the old version of this business and didn't survive the bet. Fairlife bet on the new version instead, and it's still growing fast. Everyone else, from multi-billion-dollar cooperatives down to a decades-old government checkoff fund, is still fighting over what's left in the gap between those two extremes. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this one. And if you're curious how phone brands actually make their billions, that video's right here. Go watch it.